A woman fed an injured bobcat mother years later. She returned when the woman was in danger. It started with one late-night act of kindness, a bleeding wild animal, a choice that could have cost her everything. Years passed, and that moment was all but forgotten until the danger came knocking at her own door. But what returned to her side was not just a memory. It was something far wilder, fiercer, and bound to her fate in ways no one could have imagined. When power and fear collide, and a predator becomes the only hope, the line between survival and justice blurs. The question is, when the past comes clawing back, will it save her life or end it? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The bitter winter wind howled through the pines as Hollis Vance pulled her worn flannel jacket tighter around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, unusual even for an Arizona winter night. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow as she made her final check around her modest property. Before turning in, the beam of her flashlight swept across the yard, catching something moving near her storage shed. At first, she thought it was just shadows playing tricks, but then she saw it, a bobcat, dragging itself through the snow with desperate determination, even from this distance. Hollis could see dark spots staining the white ground behind the animal. Her heart clenched. The bobcat was bleeding, yet something in its emerald eyes spoke of an unbreakable will. It wasn't just wounded. It was a mother. Hollis had seen enough wildlife to recognize that distinctive look of maternal purpose. Allured, she whispered, watching as the creature inched toward her shed. Every movement seemed to cost the animal tremendous effort, but it refused to give up. Years of warnings about feeding predators and keeping a safe distance from wild animals echoed in her mind. But something stronger than caution took hold of her heart. Without hesitation, Hollis hurried back to her kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled a shallow bowl with water and grabbed some leftover chicken from dinner. She knew she was breaking every rule in the book, but she couldn't stand by and watch a mother die trying to reach her babies. Back outside, she carefully placed the offerings a safe distance from where she'd last seen the bobcat. The animal had disappeared behind the shed, but Hollis could hear faint sounds coming from underneath it. Her suspicions were confirmed. The mother had hidden her kittens there, reaching for her phone. Hollis dialed the number she knew by heart. Boone, it's Hollis Vance. I've got a situation out here that needs your expertise. Boone Merrick's deep voice came through, steady and professional despite the late hour. What kind of situation, Ms. Vance? There's an injured bobcat mother with kittens under my shed. She's bleeding pretty bad, but I don't think she'll let anyone near her young. There was a pause on the line. Have you approached the animal? No, but Hollis hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I left out some food and water. I know I shouldn't have, but Boone, you should see her. She's fighting so hard, too. Her surprise, his voice softened. Stay inside. I'll be there in 20 minutes, true to his word. Boone's Ranger truck pulled up exactly 20 minutes later. He stepped out, broad-shouldered and capable in his uniform, gray threading through, his beard catching the moonlight. Without a word, he retrieved a medical kit from his vehicle and joined Hollis on her porch. Show me, he said simply. They moved quietly toward the shed, Boone's flashlight beam carefully sweeping the area. The food and water were gone, but fresh. Blood spots marked the snow. Boone knelt to examine them, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. The bleeding slowing, he observed, probably not as serious as it looked. These cats are tough. He straightened up, scanning the shadows beneath the shed. Best thing we can do is give her space and monitor from a distance. Moving her or the kittens would do more harm than good. Hollis wrapped her arms around herself, both from cold and worry. Will she make it? If she's still moving and eating, her chances are good. Boone turned to face her, his expression serious. Ms. Vance, I need to warn you. Feeding predators carries some heavy fines. It's meant to keep both humans and animals safe. I understand, Hollis said quietly, and I'll accept whatever consequences come. But I couldn't just watch her suffer. Something shifted in Boone's gaze. Respect, maybe, or understanding. He nodded slowly. I'll make some notes about a possible den site, but I don't see any immediate need for intervention. Sometimes nature needs to take its course. Over the next few weeks, Hollis watched from her windows as the bobcat mother grew stronger. She never left more food, but she couldn't help feeling relieved when she occasionally spotted the animal drinking from a natural water source near her property. The bleeding had stopped, and the cat's movements became more fluid, more powerful. Then one morning, she woke to find no trace of the bobcat family. The space under her shed was empty, but somehow it didn't feel like loss. Somewhere in the pines, a mother was leading her kittens home. stronger for having found a moment of mercy when she needed it most. Later that week, Boone stopped by to follow up. Standing on her porch, he handed her a warning citation, the minimum penalty he could officially give. The fine's small, he said, but it goes on record. You understand why these rules exist? Hollis took the citation, meeting his eyes steadily. I do. And I'd do it again. A slight smile touched Boone's weathered face. Some people around here could use more of your kind of trouble, Miss Vance. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. Just, next time call me first, all right? Watching him drive away, Hollis felt at peace with her choice. Some lives were worth the risk, worth the fine, worth breaking the rules for. The Bobcat had taught her that sometimes the right path isn't the easy one, but it's the one that lets you sleep at night, knowing you followed your heart instead of your fears. The winter wind still howled through the pines, but it carried a different message now, one of hope, resilience, and the quiet strength of compassion in the face of suffering. Hollis smiled, tucked the citation into her pocket, and headed inside to start her day, knowing she'd chosen well. 5 years had passed since that winter night when Hollis had helped the wounded Bobcat. Life had fallen into a comfortable pattern. Early mornings at the Pinecrest Diner, where she'd worked her way up to headline cook. Quiet evenings on her leased property watching the sunset paint the Mogollon Rim in shades of gold and purple. The routine suited her just fine, but change came to their small town like a storm gathering on the horizon. It started at the monthly town council meeting, held in the stuffy community center with its squeaking ceiling fans and coffee that always tasted like burnt rubber. Grant Tolliver stood at the podium, his expensive Western suit and gold watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Friends and neighbors, he began, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness of someone used to getting his way. The Tolliver Quarry has been the backbone of this community for 3 generations. Now, we have an opportunity to create more jobs, more prosperity, but we need to address the predator problem that's threatening our expansion plans. Hollis sat in the back row, her work apron still dusted with flour from her morning shift. She watched as Tolliver clicked through slides showing maps of his proposed quarry expansion, conveniently skirting around environmental impact studies. These nuisance predators, Tolliver continued, particularly the bobcat population, are becoming increasingly aggressive. They're a threat to livestock, pets, and potentially even children. We need to take action before someone gets hurt. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hollis's stomach tightened as she remembered the wounded mother, Bobcat, wondering if she was still out there somewhere with her grown kittens. The following week, everything changed. Tom Bradley's goat farm, just 2 miles from Hollis's property, lost 3 young kids to predator attacks. The news spread through town like wildfire, and somehow, Hollis's name got tangled up in the story. It started with whispers at first. Hollis noticed them during her shifts at the diner, the way conversations would stop when she approached tables, how some regulars suddenly preferred to sit in other sections. Then came the anonymous call to her manager, Martha. Someone said they've seen you leaving food out for wild animals, Martha said, her usually friendly face pinched with worry. With everything that's happening, we can't risk our reputation, Hollis. I'm going to have to cut back your shifts, Martha. That was 5 years ago, and it was one time, Hollis protested. I helped an injured animal. I paid my fine. I haven't. I'm sorry, Hollis, but people are scared. They're saying you've turned these cats into killers, that you've made them lose their fear of humans. The cut-in hours hit hard, for shifts became 2, then 1. The whispers grew louder, more accusatory. Someone spray-painted predator lover across her mailbox. At the next town council meeting, Tolliver had photo enlargements displayed on easels, gruesome images of the killed goats. This is what happens when we let sentiment override sense, he declared, his eyes finding Hollis in the crowd. When we coddle these predators instead of controlling them. I have witnesses who will testify to seeing certain individuals feeding these animals, encouraging them to stay close to residential areas. Hollis felt the weight of every stare in the room. Her throat burned with words she couldn't voice, knowing anything she said would only be twisted against her. She stood up and walked out, the sound of Tolliver's voice following her into the parking lot. I'm proposing an emergency ordinance to increase predator control measures in the expansion zone. Back home, Hollis sat on her porch steps, watching the sun sink behind the pines. The familiar piece of her property felt tainted now, turned suspicious by rumor and fear. A cup of coffee cooled beside her, untouched. Her phone buzzed, another text from Martha, officially cutting her last remaining shift at the diner. The isolation pressed in around her like a physical thing. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The local market clerk double-checked her change with exaggerated care, as if she might be trying to cheat them. even her nearest neighbor, old Mrs. Peterson, who used to bring over surplus tomatoes from her garden, now hurried inside when Hollis drove past. That night, as Hollis lay awake listening to the coyotes call in the distance, she realized how effectively Tolliver had orchestrated her downfall. He needed a scapegoat, someone to embody the threat to his expansion plans. And she'd handed him the perfect narrative, the woman who helped predators, who chose wild things over human safety, who couldn't be trusted. Her past act of kindness had been transformed into something dark and dangerous. The compassion she'd shown that snowy night was now being used as evidence of her reckless disregard for the community's welfare. One small choice, made from the heart, had somehow led to this, her reputation in tatters, her livelihood slipping away, her place in the community uncertain. But even now, remembering the fierce determination in that wounded mother Bobcat's eyes, Hollis couldn't bring herself to regret it. Some choices defined who you were, even if the world turned against you for making them. The morning after her last shift at the diner was cut, Hollis woke before dawn with a fierce determination burning in her chest. If Tolliver wanted to paint her as the villain, she wouldn't go down without a fight. She pulled on her hiking boots, grabbed her camera, and headed out to Tom Bradley's goat farm while the early morning fog still clung to the ground. The crime scene tape had long since been removed, but the evidence of the attack remained visible to someone who knew what to look for. Hollis crouched near the fence line, studying the ground with careful attention. Years of hunting with her father had taught her how to read signs in the dirt and vegetation. There, pressed into a patch of soft earth, she found what she was looking for, paw prints. But these weren't the distinctive round prints of a bobcat. These tracks showed clear claw marks, longer than they were wide, arranged in a typical canine pattern. Coyote tracks, without a doubt. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" Tom Bradley's voice made her jump. He stood at the edge of the pen, shotgun cradled in his arms. "Mr. Bradley, please look at these tracks," Hollis said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These weren't made by bobcats. These are coyote prints." "Get off my land," he growled. "Haven't you caused enough trouble?" But Hollis had already snapped several photos with her camera. Moving carefully away from Tom, she continued her investigation along the property line. In a thicket of scrub oak, she found exactly what she'd hoped for: coyote scat filled with goat hair and bone fragments. She photographed this too, measuring it against her hand for scale. Back home, she called Boone Merrick. He arrived within the hour, his Ranger truck kicking up dust as it rolled down her drive. The lines around his eyes deepened as he studied her photos. "This is good work, Hollis," he said. "Professional-grade documentation. Mind if I take a look at the site myself?" They drove back to Bradley's farm together. This time, when Tom came out shouting, Boone's official presence made him back down. They spent 2 hours collecting additional evidence, more tracks, more scat samples, even traces of coyote fur caught on the fence wire. The bite patterns on the deceased goats would confirm it, Boone said as they finish up. Coyotes attack differently than cats. They go for the throat, while bobcats typically attack from behind and above. They filed an official report that afternoon, complete with photographs, measurements, and Boone's professional assessment as a forest ranger. Hollis felt a glimmer of hope as she watched him submit it to the county board's online system. Finally, the truth would come out. But as days passed, nothing happened. No acknowledgement, no investigation, no correction to the narrative that had already taken hold in town. When Hollis called the county office to follow up, she was bounced from department to department, each person more dismissive than the last. "You've got to be kidding me," she said to Boone over coffee at her kitchen table a week later. "They're just going to ignore scientific evidence." Boone's weathered face was grim. "Take a look at this," he said, pulling out his tablet. He showed her the county board members' profiles, 7 people, 4 of whom had direct business ties to Tolliver's quarry operations. One was his brother-in-law. Another had received a substantial campaign donation from Tolliver's company last election. "This isn't about predators at all, is it?" Hollis said quietly, the reality sinking in. "It's about the quarry expansion. Tolliver's been buying up land all around here." Boone confirmed, "But he can't touch protected habitats. If he can prove the area's predators are a threat to local ranchers, he can push through the expansion under emergency measures," Hollis finished. "And I'm just convenient proof that bleeding hearts like me are making the problem worse." She stood up and walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the pine forest that bordered her property. The land she'd grown to love, the quiet peace she'd found here. It was all part of something bigger. Tolliver wasn't just attacking her reputation. He was systematically dismantling any opposition to his plans for the region. "The system's rigged," she said, her hands clenching into fist. "We have proof that his whole predator panic is based on lies, and they're just going to bury it. Welcome to small-town politics, Boone said, but his tone was sympathetic. Money talks, and Tolliver's got plenty of it. He's been working this angle for years, building relationships, trading favors, setting up his pieces like a chess game. Hollis thought about the Bobcat mother she'd helped years ago. How she'd fought to survive despite her wounds. That same spirit of resilience stirred in her now. Then we need to find another way, she said. The truth is on our side. We just have to figure out how to make it heard. Boone studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I might have some ideas about that. But Hollis, going up against Tolliver means making yourself an even bigger target. Are you sure you're ready for that? She met his gaze steadily. I've already lost my job, my reputation, and most of my friends. What else can he take? Don't underestimate him. Boone warned. This goes deeper than you know. That expansion plan of his, it's not just about limestone. There are rumors about rare earth minerals in these hills, the kind that tech companies pay millions for. That's why he's pushing so hard. Why he's willing to destroy anything or anyone that stands in his way. Hollis absorbed this information, feeling the weight of what they were up against. But she also felt something else, a surge of clarity and purpose. The evidence they'd gathered might have been suppressed, but it wasn't destroyed. It was a beginning, a foundation to build on. She walked to her desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. Tell me everything you know about Tolliver's operations, she said. Every connection, every rumor, every piece of land he's bought. We're going to map it all out. As the afternoon sun slanted through her windows, Hollis and Boone began piecing together the larger picture of Tolliver's influence. The predator hysteria was just one thread in a complex web of power and control, but threads, once identified, could be unraveled. The truth might be buried for now, but like the fierce Bobcat mother from years ago, it wouldn't stay down forever. Hollis knew she needed help to expose the truth. Standing in her small kitchen one morning, she spread out a worn map of the area on her table while her coffee went cold. A plan was forming, but she couldn't do this alone. Her first ally came in the form of Boone Merrick. The broad-shouldered ranger showed up at her door just after sunrise. His usually neat uniform wrinkled from what looked like a sleepless night. They're threatening to suspend me, he said without preamble, his weathered face tight with concern. Tolliver's got friends in the department. They say I'm undermining local business interests by helping you. Hollis's heart sank. Boone, I can't let you risk your job for me. He shook his head firmly. This isn't just about you anymore. Something's wrong here. And I took an oath to protect these lands, not just follow orders. Their unexpected second. Ally arrived that same afternoon. Reese Kettering limped up Hollis's gravel driveway, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. She recognized him from town, the former quarry foreman who'd had that terrible accident too. Years ago. Miss Vance, he called out, his voice rough from years of quarry dust. I got something you need to hear about Tolliver. Over coffee at her kitchen table, Reese shared his story. That accident that crushed my leg wasn't no accident. Tolliver knew those support beams were rotting, chose profit over safety every time. His hands shook as he held his mug. But that ain't all. I've seen them snares they're laying out. Steel traps, cruel ones. Been doing it for months. Trying to stir up trouble. The next day brought Morris Wheeler, a retired land surveyor who'd worked the area for 40 years. His arthritis-curved fingers traced lines on old topographical maps he brought along. These marks here, he pointed to faded pencil notes. They're the old snare lines from back when ranchers were trying to clear out mountain lions. Tolliver's been asking about them. Real interested like. Together, they formed a plan, using Morris's maps and Reese's knowledge of Tolliver's operations. They identified several remote cabins that might serve as storage for the illegal traps. Boone's expertise helped them plan their search carefully to avoid trespassing charges. On a cool morning, 3 days later, they set out into vehicles. Hollis rode with Boone in his personal truck. He couldn't use his Ranger vehicle for this. While Reese and Morris followed in Reese's old pickup, they parked at an abandoned logging trail and continued on foot. The first 2 cabins yielded nothing but dust and mouse droppings. But at the third location, hidden in a grove of ponderosa pines, they found what they were looking for. Over here, Boone called softly, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom of the cabin's interior. The beam illuminated rows of cruel steel teeth, dozens of illegal snares, hanging from hooks on the walls. Hollis's hands trembled as she took photographs with her father's old camera. These aren't just any traps, she said, examining them closely. These are banned. They're designed to kill, not catch. Reese hobbled forward, his face grim. I recognize these. Saw them being unloaded at the quarry last month. Tolliver said they were equipment parts. Mara studied the setup with knowing eyes. They've been laying these out systematic, trying to create a predator problem where there isn't one. Make folks scared enough to support pushing the wildlife out. Boone carefully documented everything with his own camera. This is evidence of illegal hunting practices, endangered species harassment, and who knows what else. But we need to be careful how we use it. Tolliver's got friends in every office that could help us. As they carefully made their way back to their vehicles, Hollis felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. She wasn't alone anymore. These men, each wounded in their own way by Tolliver's greed, had chosen to stand with her. "We need to be smart about this," Boone said as they gathered one final time by their vehicles. "Tolliver's got money and influence, but we've got truth on our side. Sometimes that's enough. If you know how to use it right." Reese nodded, leaning on his cane. "And we've got something else. We've got nothing left to lose. Men like Tolliver. They don't expect folks like us to fight back. That's going to be their weakness." Mars carefully rolled up his maps. "You know what my daddy used to say? Truth's like water. It might take the long way round, but it always finds its path." The discovery of the snares was just the beginning. But as Hollis looked at her unlikely allies, the principled ranger, the injured foreman, and the knowledgeable surveyor, she knew they had taken the first crucial step. Together, they had proof that Tolliver wasn't just exploiting the land. He was actively manufacturing a crisis to serve his own ends. The retaliation came swift and brutal, like a winter storm sweeping down from the Mogollon Rim. Just 3 days after Hollis and her allies discovered the illegal snare cache, she received a frantic call from Boone. "Someone planted evidence," he said, his voice tight with worry, "at one of the new snare sites we found. You need to see this." When Hollis arrived at the location, her heart nearly stopped. There, prominently placed beside a freshly set steel trap, lay her father's old hunting knife. The bone handle was unmistakable, worn smooth from years of use. She kept it in a wooden box on her mantel since his passing 5 years ago, a treasured memory of their hunting trips together. "Someone broke into my house," she whispered, her hands shaking as she stared at the knife. "They took it from my home." Boone's face was grim. "We need to document everything before touching it. This is a setup, plain and simple." But before they could properly photograph the scene, 3 county officers arrived, their patrol vehicles kicking up dust on the forest road. Someone had tipped them off. They took pictures of their own, bagged the knife as evidence, and wrote up a damning report linking Hollis to the illegal snares. The local paper ran the story the next day. Local woman linked to illegal trapping. Operation, her father's knife, a symbol of ethical hunting and respect for the land, had been twisted into something ugly. That was just the beginning. 2 days later, a video began circulating on social media. The grainy footage, clearly edited and manipulated, showed what appeared to be Boone Merrick tampering with evidence at one of the snare sites. Though the video was obviously doctored, the lighting changed abruptly, and Boone's movements were unnaturally jerky. The damage was done, effective immediately. "Ranger Merrick is suspended pending an internal investigation," his supervisor announced at a hastily called press conference. Boone stood stone-faced as his badge and service weapon were collected. "This is ridiculous," he told Hollis later that evening, sitting at her kitchen table. "That video is about as real as a $3 bill, but Tolliver's got them convinced. Without my badge, I can't access any of the official documentation we've been gathering." Hollis felt the walls closing in. With Boone suspended, she'd lost not just an ally but her strongest defender. The whispers in town grew louder. People crossed the street to avoid her. The diner owner, who'd already cut her hours, now fired her outright. "I'm sorry, Hollis," he said, not meeting her eyes, "but we can't have all this controversy. It's bad for business." She drove home that night with tears blurring her vision. The tiny house she'd made her home felt more like a prison. Now, someone had spray-painted Predator Lover across her mailbox. The local Facebook groups were filled with angry posts about her, sharing that doctored video of Boone and wild theories about her involvement with the snares. Sitting alone in her darkened living room, staring at the empty space on her mantel, where her father's knife had been, Hollis felt her resolve beginning to crack. How could she fight against someone like Tolliver? He had money, influence, and seemingly endless resources to twist the truth. She was just a former line cook with a small piece of leased land, and a rapidly dwindling group of allies. Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous text message: "Leave town before things get worse." The Bobcat she'd saved years ago had at least had a fighting chance, with teeth and claws to defend herself. Hollis felt stripped of even that much. Every attempt she'd made to prove her innocence had been turned against her. The evidence she and Boone had gathered about the real culprits behind the snares seemed meaningless now. She picked up a framed photo of her father, his kind eyes smiling back at her from beneath his worn hunting cap. He taught her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Now she wondered if he'd been wrong. Maybe sometimes the machine was just too big. The corruption to deep. Her phone rang. Boone calling. She let it go. To voicemail, to drain, to talk even to him. Without his badge and authority backing them. What chance did they have? Tolliver's retribution had been calculated and thorough. Designed to isolate her completely, the night grew deeper, and Hollis sat in the darkness, listening to the wind in the pines outside. Somewhere out there, past her small circle of light, Tolliver's men were probably setting more snares, destroying more evidence, planning their next move. For the first time since this fight began, she seriously considered giving up selling her lease and disappearing to some distant city where nobody knew her name. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Her father's knife, her reputation, her job, Boone's career. How much more could Tolliver take from them? How much more could she lose before admitting defeat? The doctored video of Boone played again and again on local news channels, each showing making her stomach twist with guilt and anger. He'd lost everything because he tried to help her. The thought of him sitting at home, stripped of the badge he'd worn with such pride and integrity, made her heart ache. Every shadow now held potential threats. Every unexpected sound made her jump. Tolliver had succeeded in more than just destroying her reputation. He'd stolen her peace of mind, her sense of security in her own home. The place she'd once found so comforting now felt exposed and vulnerable, just like she did. The evening sun cast long shadows across Hollis's porch as Reese Kettering limped up her weathered steps. His face was drawn, shoulders hunched with the weight of something more than his physical pain. Hollis could tell by his expression that this wasn't a casual visit. "Need to talk to you," he said, his voice rough. "About that Bobcat you helped years back." Hollis gestured to the wooden chair beside her. "The mother with the injury? What about?" Reese lowered himself carefully into the seat, his bad legs stretched out before him. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in his lap. "I've been carrying this truth for too long. That Bobcat, she was caught in one of Tolliver's snares. I know because I was there that night." The revelation hit Hollis like a physical blow. She gripped the porch railing. Memories of the wounded animal flooding back, the deep gash along her flank, the determination in those amber eyes. "I worked as Tolliver's foreman back then," Reese continued, unable to meet her gaze. "We'd set snares all through these hills. Illegal ones, cruel steel traps that would catch anything that crossed their path. That night, I heard the noise. Found her fighting against the trap, bleeding but still alive." Hollis's throat tightened. "Why didn't you report it?" "Tolliver had me convinced it was necessary. Called it predator control. Said it was for the good of the community." Reese's voice cracked. "I couldn't bring myself to finish her off. Just left her there. Figured nature would take its course. When I came back the next day, the trap was sprung but she was gone. Tracked the blood trail, heading toward your property." Understanding dawned across Hollis's face. "That's why she ended up at my shed. She was trying to find somewhere safe for her kittens." "Yeah. And you helped her. Showed her kindness when the rest of us." Reese shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "That Bobcat isn't just some random animal you saved, Hollis. She's living proof of what Tolliver's been doing all these years. The scars she carries, they're evidence of his illegal trapping operation." Hollis stood abruptly, pacing the porch. As her mind raced, the scarred Bobcat, she's been spotted recently. Several people have seen her with a nearly grown offspring. "Exactly," Reese nodded eagerly. "She's still out there, still carrying the marks of Tolliver's cruelty. If we could document her injuries, match them to the type of snares we found in that cabin, we could prove how long this has been going on." Hollis finished. "Show that Tolliver's been running an illegal trapping operation for years, not just recently, and prove that the predator problem he's been blaming you for is something he manufactured himself." Reese leaned forward, intensity in his eyes. "That Bobcat is the key, Hollis. She connects everything. The illegal snares, the timeline, the real source of the problem. She's the living proof we need." Hollis sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the significance of this revelation. The injured Bobcat she'd helped on pure instinct had become the thread that could unravel Tolliver's entire scheme. Her act of compassion, which he tried to use against her, might end up being his undoing. "We need to find her," Hollis said firmly. "Document everything. Her scars, her movements, her den sites if possible. Get photographic evidence that can't be disputed." "It won't be easy," Reese warned. "Tolliver's got people watching your every move. And that Bobcat, she may trust you more than most. But she's still wild. She's worth the risk," Hollis replied, remembering those determined amber eyes from years ago. Just like she was worth it that first night. Sometimes doing the right thing leads you exactly where you need to be, even if you don't know it at the time. As twilight deepened around them, Hollis and Reese began plotting how to document the scarred bobcat's existence. The animal Hollis had once saved out of pure compassion had become something more, a symbol of resistance against Tolliver's cruelty, and perhaps their best chance at exposing the truth that had been hidden in these hills for far too long. The weight of this knowledge settled over Hollis like a mantle of responsibility. She thought of the bobcat mother, still out there, raising her young despite everything she'd endured. If that wounded animal could find the strength to survive and thrive, surely Hollis could find the courage to see this fight through to the end. The crisp morning air filled Hollis's lungs as she crouched in the underbrush, carefully positioning the last motion-activated camera. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking the angle and ensuring the camouflaged housing blended seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation. After years of tracking wildlife, she knew exactly how to make equipment disappear into the landscape. "That's the fourth one in place," she whispered to Reese, who stood watch nearby. "We've got the whole haul road covered now." Reese nodded, leaning on his cane. Smart thinking. Using those deer carcasses as bait, any predator in the area will come investigating, including the two-legged kind, Hollis replied, her voice grim but determined. They had carefully placed roadkill near each camera location, knowing it would draw both wildlife and anyone setting illegal traps. Back at her small kitchen table that evening, Hollis gathered with her allies, Reese, Boone, though still officially suspended, and Sarah Chen, a local environmental lawyer who'd agreed to help pro bono. They pored over maps of the area, marking camera locations and known snare sites. "We need solid evidence," Sarah explained, tapping her pencil against the map. "Something that clearly shows who's setting these illegal traps and planning the fires. The board won't be able to ignore video footage." 3 tense days passed as they waited. Hollis checked the cameras daily, careful to vary her schedule so she couldn't be predicted. On the 4th morning, her hands shook as she pulled the memory card from the first camera. The team huddled around her laptop, watching grainy nighttime footage. Hours of deer and coyotes scrolled by until suddenly, movement. A large figure emerged from a pickup truck, the vehicle's headlights briefly illuminating Mac Dwyer's familiar bulk. "There," Boone pointed. "Look what he's carrying." They watched as Dwyer set up multiple snares, his movements practiced and efficient. But it was what he did next that made them all catch their breath. From his truck, he unloaded several containers of accelerant, carefully placing them in the brush. "He's setting up for a fire," Reese said quietly. "Create a crisis, blame it on predators. Push through the expansion while everyone's distracted." The other cameras yielded similar footage, different locations, same activities. They had Dwyer on video at multiple sites, clearly identifiable, clearly breaking several laws. Sarah immediately began preparing their presentation for the county board. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, organizing the footage into clear segments. "We can prove pattern and intent." The day of the hearing arrived with tension thick in the air. The county courthouse's main chamber was packed, mostly with Tolliver's supporters. Hollis felt their hostile stares as she walked to the podium. But she kept her head high. "Members of the board," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're here today with evidence of illegal activities, directly connected to the proposed quarry expansion." The room erupted in murmurs as they played the footage. Even Tolliver's most steadfast allies couldn't ignore the clear images of his enforcer setting snares and preparing for arson. Dwyer's face was clearly visible in several frames, the time stamp and GPS coordinates providing irrefutable context. Grant Tolliver sat in the front row, his usual smug expression cracking as the evidence mounted. When Mac Dwyer's face appeared on screen again, Tolliver's hands clenched into fist, his knuckles white. Sarah Chen presented the legal implications calmly and clearly. "These actions violate multiple state and federal laws, the placement of unmarked snares, the planned use of accelerants in a protected area, the deliberate endangerment of protected species. Any one of these would be grounds to halt the expansion pending investigation." The board members exchanged long looks. Chairman Peterson, usually firmly in Tolliver's pocket, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "This evidence is concerning," he admitted. "We cannot in good conscience proceed with the expansion approval while these allegations are uninvestigated. This is ridiculous." Tolliver burst out, standing. "That footage could be doctored. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to." The footage has already been authenticated by 2 independent experts. Sarah interrupted smoothly, sliding forward another document. "Their certifications are included in your packets." The vote was unanimous. Expansion halted pending full investigation. As the chamber cleared, Hollis felt tears of relief threatening. Ree squeezed her shoulder, while Boone gave her a quiet nod of pride. This isn't over, she heard Tolliver growl as he stormed past. Not by a long shot, but for now, they had won. The cameras had caught what human eyes couldn't, bringing truth into the light. As Hollis walked out into the bright Arizona sunshine, she felt the first real hope she'd had in months. They had scored a victory, not just for her reputation, but for every creature that called these lands home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Hollis emerged from the hearing, her heart still racing from their hard-won victory. The board's decision to halt the quarry expansion felt like the first real breath of fresh air she'd taken in months. The scattered crowd was thinning, voices fading into the cool mountain breeze. She pulled her phone from her pocket, eager to share the news with Boone. That's when a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder. Before she could react, Mac Dwyer's massive form loomed behind her, his grip painful as steel. "Going somewhere, Miss Vance." His voice was eerily calm, setting off every alarm in her body. Hollis tried to wrench away, but Mac's fingers only dug deeper. "Let go of me," her cry echoed across the now empty parking lot. "Can't do that. Boss has some unfinished business with you." In one fluid motion, he wrapped his arm around her waist and dragged her toward his idling truck. Hollis fought hard, kicking and twisting, but Mac's size advantage was overwhelming. Her phone clattered to the pavement as he shoved her into the passenger seat. The door slammed, the child lock clicking with finality. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as Mac accelerated away from town. Hollis's hand flew to her radio, her backup lifeline, but Mac snatched it away, hurling it against the dashboard. The device shattered, pieces scattering across her feet. "That was stupid," he growled, taking a sharp turn onto a dirt road that led deep into the canyonlands. Hollis's mind raced, tracking their route. They were heading into the maze of box canyons north of town. Remote terrain she knew was riddled with dry brush and dead ends. "Mac, think about what you're doing. The board already has the evidence." He barked out a harsh laugh. "Evidence don't mean much when there's no one left to testify." The truck bounced violently over the rough terrain before skidding to a stop. Mac yanked her out, shoving her forward into a narrow canyon. The walls rose steep and smooth on either side, offering no escape route. Dead vegetation crackled under their feet as he forced her deeper into the ravine. "Keep moving," he ordered, producing a lighter from his pocket. The flame danced in his eyes as he began setting the dry brush alight behind them. Horror dawned as Hollis realized his plan. The canyon was a natural chimney. Once the fire took hold, smoke and flames would have nowhere to go but up, with her trapped in their path. Already, the first wisps of gray were curling skyward, carried by the afternoon. "Updraft. You don't have to do this," she pleaded, backing away from the growing flames. "Whatever Tolliver is paying you, it's not worth murder." "Shut up." Mac's face twisted with rage. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Playing wildlife. Savior while honest men lose their jobs." He lit another patch of brush, the flames catching quickly in the dry air. Hollis stumbled backward, her eyes stinging as smoke began to fill the canyon. The walls seemed to close in around her as the fire spread, feeding hungrily on years of accumulated deadfall. Her lungs burned with each breath, the air growing thicker by the second. She could hear Mac's heavy boots crunching away, leaving her to her fate. The smoke was becoming unbearable, forcing her deeper into the canyon as she searched desperately for any way out. The smooth walls offered no purchase for climbing, and the fire was spreading faster than she could retreat, coughing violently. Hollis pulled her shirt over her nose, trying to filter the acrid smoke. The heat was intense now, flames dancing ever closer. Her eyes watered, vision blurring as she pressed herself against the canyon wall. The reality of her situation hit hard. She was trapped, alone, with a wall of fire advancing and no way to call for help. Dark spots swam at the edges of her vision as the smoke thickened. She could barely see 10 feet ahead through the gray haze. Her legs trembled, muscles screaming for oxygen as she stumbled forward, searching blindly for any break in the canyon walls, any possible escape route. The roar of the fire filled her ears, drowning out everything else. Waves of heat buffeted her face as she pressed onward, knowing that to stop moving meant certain death. Her world had narrowed to this, the next step, the next burning breath, the desperate fight to keep going even as her body begged to give up. The smoke thickened around Hollis as she pressed herself against the canyon wall, each breath burning her lungs like liquid fire. Her eyes stung, tears streaming down her soot-covered face. The crackling flames were closing in, turning the narrow ravine into a deadly trap. Mac had planned this well. The dry brush caught quickly, feeding the inferno that would hide all evidence of his crime. Through the haze, she could barely make out his hulking form. He stood at the ravine's edge, watching with cold satisfaction as the flames spread. The radio lay smashed at his feet, and her phone was somewhere in his pocket. No way to call for help. No way to escape. Should have kept your nose out of Tolliver's business, Mac called down, his voice carrying over the roar of the fire. Now look what you made me do. Hollis stumbled forward, desperate for clearer air. The heat pressed in from all sides, making it harder to think. Her throat felt raw, each cough more painful than the last. The canyon walls, usually a comforting presence, now seemed to close in like a tomb dot just when despair threatened to overwhelm her. A sound cut through the chaos, a familiar, piercing screech that made her heart skip. Through the smoke, amber eyes gleamed. The scarred Bobcat mother emerged like a ghost from her past, but this time she wasn't alone. Two nearly grown offspring flanked her, their muscles tensed and ready. Mac hadn't noticed them yet. To focus on ensuring Hollis's fate, the Bobcat family moved with silent precision, their bond with each other evident in every synchronized step. The mother's scarred flank, a testament to her own brush with Tolliver's cruelty, rippled as she gathered herself to spring. The attack came without warning. All three cats launched themselves at Mac in a fury of claws and snarls. He screamed in shock and pain as they struck, his massive frame stumbling backward. The young cats went for his legs while their mother aimed higher, her claws finding purchase in his chest. Get off me. Mac's bellow echoed through the canyon as he lost his footing. He windmilled his arms, trying to keep his balance, but the cat's assault was relentless. With a final desperate twist, he toppled over the edge of the ravine. The sickening crack of his ankle breaking on impact echoed off the canyon walls. His howl of pain mixed with the cat's fierce growls as they bounded away from him, disappearing into the smoke like wraiths. But they hadn't abandoned the scene entirely. The mother Bobcat reappeared through the haze, her amber eyes fixed on Hollis. There was recognition there, an impossible connection bridging the years since that snowy night when Hollis had chosen compassion over fear. The cat moved with purpose, weaving between patches of flame. Her offspring followed, creating a living chain through the inferno. Hollis understood immediately. They were showing her the way out, following their lead. She pushed away from the wall. Her lungs screamed for clean air, but she forced herself to focus on the cats ahead. They led her to a narrow crease in the basalt wall, a hidden path she would never have found on her own. Behind her, Mac's pain curses grew fainter as she scrambled through the tight passage. The cats moved with fluid grace, guiding her upward where the air grew clear with each step. The mother occasionally looked back, as if making sure Hollis kept pace. Finally, they emerged onto a small ledge above the fire line. Fresh air rushed into Hollis's burning lungs, making her dizzy with relief. She dropped to her knees, coughing and gulping in precious oxygen. The Bobcat family paused nearby, their work done. The mother's scarred face turned toward Hollis one last time, and in that moment, everything came full circle. Years ago, Hollis had trusted her instincts to help a wounded creature. Now that trust had been repaid in kind, not through human logic or spoken words, but through the pure, unspoken language of survival and compassion. With a final flick of their tails, the cats melted away into the wilderness, leaving Hollis alive and free. She watched them go, understanding deep in her heart that some bonds transcend the barriers between species. The Bobcat mother had remembered, had chosen to return her long-ago kindness when it mattered most. In saving Hollis's life, she had proven that mercy, once given, could echo through the years to create its own kind of justice. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the smoky air like a knife. Through the haze, Hollis saw the flash of red and blue lights bouncing off the canyon walls. Her heart leaped as she recognized Boone's truck leading a convoy of sheriff's vehicles down the access road. Over here, she shouted, her voice hoarse from the smoke. Mac tried to scramble away, but his broken ankle kept him pinned. Cursing and spitting in frustration, Boone was the first to reach her, his weathered face etched with worry. Are you okay? He asked, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. She nodded, still coughing, but managing a weak smile. We got everything, Boone said, his voice firm with satisfaction. The whole operation. Reese came through with documented proof of every illegal snare line Tolliver's placed in the last 5 years, and we found the financial records linking him directly to the brush fires. The deputies moved quickly, securing Mac despite his protest. 2 more patrol cars roared up, and Hollis felt a surge of vindication as she watched them pull a handcuffed Grant Tolliver from the back seat. His expensive Western suit was wrinkled, his usual arrogant expression replaced by barely contained rage. You can't do this, Tolliver sputtered as they led him toward a waiting vehicle. I own half this county. Not anymore, one of the deputies replied, guiding him firmly into the car. We've got signed confessions from 3 of your board members about the bribes, the habitat destruction, all of it. The emergency response teams worked efficiently to contain the fire Mac had started, while evidence technicians photographed and documented the scene. Hollis watched it all unfold like a dream, barely noticing when a paramedic draped a blanket over her shoulders and checked her for smoke inhalation. 2 weeks later, Hollis sat in the county boardroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the final verdict was read. The quarry expansion permit was unanimously denied. More than that, Tolliver's company was being hit with massive fines for environmental violations, money that would be used to establish protected wildlife corridors and habitat easements across the region. Furthermore, the board chairman announced, Ranger Boone Merrick is hereby reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology for his unjust suspension. Boone, sitting beside her in his freshly pressed ranger uniform, squeezed her hand gently. His quiet faith in her had never wavered, even when the whole town turned against her. Now that faith was vindicated. After the hearing, Hollis drove home with a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in months. She pulled up to her modest house and smiled at the transformation taking place in her old shed. With proper permits in hand, she was converting it into a licensed wildlife triage facility. The basic framework was already in place: clean holding areas, medical supplies, and proper documentation systems. It's starting to look real, Boone observed, helping her unload some new equipment from his truck. You're going to make an excellent rehabilitator. I never thought I'd get the chance, Hollis admitted, organizing supplies on the newly installed shelves. After everything Tolliver did to destroy my reputation, people know the truth now, Boone reminded her. They've seen your heart. As evening approached, Hollis stepped outside to watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Movement caught her eye. There, on the rocky outcropping above her property, stood the scarred Bobcat mother. The cat's amber eyes met hers across the distance, steady and knowing. Hollis held her breath, remembering that desperate night years ago when she'd first chosen to help the wounded creature. Now here they were, their paths having crossed again in ways she never could have imagined. The Bobcat had repaid her kindness tenfold, saving her life in that smoke-filled canyon. The magnificent animal stood perfectly still, her coat glowing in the fading light. This wasn't like their previous encounters. There was a sense of finality, of completion. No words were needed between them. Their debt to each other was balanced. Their lives forever changed by that first act of compassion. As dusk deepened, the Bobcat turned silently and melted into the growing shadows. Hollis watched until the last trace of movement disappeared, her heart full. She knew she wouldn't see the cat again, and that was as it should be. Their story together had come full circle. She walked back to her shed-turned-clinic, running her hands over the new sign that read Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Tomorrow she would begin her official training. There would be other animals to help, other lives to touch. But she would never forget the scarred Bobcat mother who had taught her that sometimes the greatest acts of courage start with a simple choice to be kind. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that would now stay wild and free, protected from those who would destroy it for profit. Hollis smiled, knowing that her own story was just beginning. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.